Fundamental rights and duties, that is what we would understand today. Now, understand a simple fashion where we talk about it is a duty of a parent to educate a child, but on the other hand, it is the right of a child to get educated. That means rights and duties are like two wheels of a chariot. Both of the wheels are required for the chariot to move properly. Now, if we summarize rights versus duties in simple terms, I can say rights are the simple rules of interactions among the people that is being done. So, what we ask for or what we can claim for is our right. However, what we should do or our duty towards something is, in simple terms, what is our duty. So what we should do versus what we have is the difference between the rights and the duties. Duties are simple obligations and they always give a meaning to the rights. Rights, on the other hand, are constrained by actions. Now, these could be legal actions, ethical actions, or social actions. So, we would be talking about fundamental rights and duties today in detail. Coming on to fundamental rights first. Fundamental rights have been enshrined in the Constitution and have been recognized by the states. They are mentioned in the Part 3 of the Constitution, and Constitution guarantees them. Also, they are justifiable in the court of law. That means you can simply go to the court and seek protection in case you feel that your rights are not justified. Now, this is what is fundamental right. However, duties were added later in the Constitution. Initially, when the Constitution was written, it was believed it's duty of an individual, so the individuals would do their duty. But it was realized that the individuals were not doing their duty, and as a result, later in Part 4A of the Constitution, you had fundamental duties that were introduced under 42nd Amendment Act. So introduction of fundamental duties was later. Fundamental rights were introduced earlier. The next important thing that we need to understand is fundamental duties are non-justifiable. When I say it's a duty of a teacher to teach, so it's just a duty of a teacher to teach or a duty of a parent to upbring a child, but this is not enforceable in the court of law. However, if the child is not getting a education that he or she wants, the child can reach the court because it's the right of the child to get educated. And that's the difference between the fact that fundamental rights are enforceable in the court of law, are justifiable in the court of law. However, duties are non-justifiable. You cannot go to court for protection of your fundamental duties. Coming on to the 6 types of fundamental rights. Now, the 6 types of fundamental rights are interesting. Before we begin with those and the sub details of each of those rights, let's talk about the 7th right which has been deleted. Now, the 7th right which has been deleted is the right to property. This was initially part of the fundamental rights but now has turned simply into a legal right. It is no more a fundamental right. It was removed under the Constitutional Amendment Act in 1978, and this was the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. Now remember these acts carefully because removal of right to property is under the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. However, the fundamental duties being added is part of the 42nd Constitutional Amendment. So some of the constitutional amendment gets really important. Now, what are the 6 basic fundamental rights that we would be discussing in detail as we move forward in this lecture are right to equality, right to freedom, right against any kind of exploitation, cultural and educational right, right to religious freedom, and right to constitutional remedies. Now, out of these, let's first talk about right to constitutional remedies. Right to constitutional remedy is also known as the heart and soul of the Constitution. Why so? Because fundamental rights are important, and since they are justifiable in the court, we can go to the court to seek protection. That means these rights should not be violated, and in case they are violated, we can seek for a constitutional remedy where changes could be brought about in the text of the constitution itself. And that's the basic key about the right to constitutional remedies. So right to constitutional remedies has been mentioned under article 32. If you want to go for more details on right to constitutional remedies, where we have covered a separate lecture where we have discussed the writs, the orders, and the directions that the court can issue in order to enforce the fundamental rights. So, enforcement of fundamental rights is something that is crucial, and that comes under the right to constitutional remedies. Coming on to each of the rights one by one. So we'll first talk about right to equality. Right to equality is mentioned under Article 14 to 18 of the Constitution, and it talks about equal opportunities. So there are various options that we understand under that. So the first is equality of opportunity to all citizens when it comes to employment, and this ensures that people from all segment of the society, ST, SC, OBCs, are given opportunities in public employment. There should be no discrimination that should be based on race, gender, religion, caste, or a place of birth of an individual. Everyone should be treated equal before the law. Any titles which were given during the British period, like Sir, Knighthood, Rai Bahadur, should be abolished with immediate effect. And these are just a kind of way where artificial distinctions are being provided, and there is no requirement of such artificial distinctions in the court of law, in the court of justice, in the constitution itself. The next is abolition of untouchability. This is again one of the major right to equality that had been fought for. So those were the rights for equality. Now, with the rights for equality, freedom becomes essential. So under right to freedom, which follows next, so right to equality was Article 14 to 18, right to freedom Article 19 to 22 has 4 subparts. Let's talk about the protection against arrest and detention of an individual under Article 22. Now here, the person must be brought to the magistrate within 24 hours of a arrest, and that should be under the preventive detention law, and therefore Article 22 is important. Article 21 seeks for protection of life and personal liberty. Later on, under the Article 21A was introduced, which is RTE, that is right to education, providing free and compulsory education to children in the age group of 6 to 14 years. The next is protection and respect of conviction for offences under Article 20. Again, this talks about preventing a person from kind of convictions for the offences that are there. That means no one can be given a punishment which is greater than though that provided by the law. So whatever is provided by the law, that is the maximum amount of punishment that is permissible. The next is 6 freedoms. Now this talks about right to freedom and expression. Now all of these rights come with certain restrictions. Now right to freedom and expression is allowed till the point you see that there is no undue usage, where a person is not using his right to freedom of speech and expression to bring about a violence in the society. So this is a restriction. The next is right to assemble peacefully without arms. This should be allowed, but in case if it is for any other purpose, where it is for harm of an individual or a segment of the society, this is restricted. Right to form associations and unions. Now that is again allowed under the constitution, but there are restrictions on what kind of organizations or associations cannot be formed, which could be detrimental to the safety and the security of the nation. Right to move freely throughout the territory of India, but this does not allow any kind of illegal activities to be established across India. The next is freedom to reside and settle in any part of the country with a restriction in the regions very close to the airport or the aerodrome. And the next is freedom to practice any kind of profession and carry out any kind of occupation, trade or business until and unless it is not detrimental to the society at large. So those are the various freedoms. So under the 6 freedoms that we have talked about, these are the 6 freedoms that we have, but these 6 freedoms come with their own restrictions that we must understand. The next is right against exploitation. Now right against exploitation believes that no child under 14 years of age would be provided employment in factories, mines or any other hazardous employment would not be allowed. Again, so this is under 14 years of age. And under again, prohibition of trafficking in human behavior should be checked. So process of trafficking or prohibition of trafficking is something that is important. The next is right to freedom of religion. Now this comes under article 25 to 28. Again, very important. What are the key ideas? The key ideas is there is freedom to manage all the kind of religious affairs, attend any kind of religious instruction or religious worship, freedom to practice any religion that you want, and freedom as to the payment of the taxes to promote any religion that you want. However, we need to understand that this is subject to public order and the health of the nation at large. Now, what are the rights that are there? The rights include establishment and maintenance of religious institutions, managing the own affairs of the religious body, making sure that an individual has the right to acquire or own the movable or the immovable property and administer that property in accordance to the rule of law. So all of those are part of the right to freedom of religion under article 25 to 28. The next is the cultural and educational right. Now this is article 29 and 30. It focuses on protection of minorities and establishment of educational institutions for minorities. Now who are minorities? This is an interesting question. If we take an example of Sikh community, now Sikh community is a majority community in the region of Punjab, but they are minorities in other states. Might be, let's take examples of northeast state or southern states. This community turns into a minority there. So that is where we say there is protection of interest of the minority group that is required. So those are the important 6 fundamental rights that we have talked about. Now these fundamental rights are not only fundamental in nature, they are human rights. That means when I say they are human rights, there are 3 elements. Firstly, they are universal in nature. The second is they are fundamental, that is they are inalienable. And the last is they are absolute in nature. So when I say any right is universal, fundamental and absolute, it becomes a human right. Universal means it belongs to all the humans everywhere. Fundamental, as we said, it is alienable, and absolute means they are basis of they are basic to individual who is living, and therefore it is absolute. Now these are the human rights: equality before law, freedom from any kind of discrimination, right to life and property, right to life and liberty, right to freely move, to education, for marriage and family, freedom of thought, peaceful assembly and participation in the cultural life of the community. Now the General Assembly of United Nations adopted the human rights in the year 1948, and this was mentioned as Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Later on, this was accepted in India as well, and you had the National Human Rights Commission that was formed in 1993, and that was where Indian citizens were given the human rights. So, I repeat again, human rights are not only fundamental, they are universal as well as absolute in nature, and therefore they are applicable to all the living entities everywhere. And that is the basic idea under human rights, and this was given under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The next that we would discuss is the fundamental duties. Now, before we talk about what fundamental duties we have or what we should do, let's have a quick glimpse about the fundamental duties. As we said previously, fundamental duties were not initially part of the Constitution. It was expected that every person would do their duty, but what turned out was not in favor of the society, and people were not doing their due diligence. As a result, there was an amendment in the Constitution that was brought, and that was the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, under which Part 4A of the Constitution, you had introduction of fundamental rights, that was, sorry, fundamental duties, that was done. My apologies, it's not fundamental rights here, it's fundamental duties under Article 42nd of the Constitutional Amendment Act. Now, what was the idea? The idea was there would be 10 fundamental duties that would be laid down, and that individuals should do. So that is to abide by the rules or the Constitution of India. The next is to respect the national flag, national anthem, to follow the ideas that have been given under the national struggle, to protect the unity and the integrity of India, to defend the country, to maintain harmony between people, to protect our culture, our heritage, to improve the natural conditions around us, to develop scientific attitude, spirit of inquiry and innovation, to safeguard the public property, not damage the public property, and to serve as an excellent individual, not only in one sphere but across all spheres of life. And therefore, I repeat again the same example: right to education, which was under Article 21A, is a right for a child, but it is a duty of a teacher to educate a child. The teacher cannot be uh, basically that's a fundamental duty, and it's non-justifiable in the court of law, and therefore if the teacher is not doing that, the teacher cannot be actually punished in the court of law. That is a fundamental duty. Okay, so these are the duties what an individual should do, and what we ask for, or what we consider others to give us or the Constitution to give us, is our fundamental right. And that's one of the basic differences between rights and duties. A lot of students usually get confused, so here we had a quick summary about this. We would be bringing many interesting lectures in political science. Stay tuned for many updates from our side. Have a wonderful day ahead.